Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode is sponsored by NFL Draft Fanatics. Today's episode is going to focus on wide receivers and cornerbacks playing this weekend, and we definitely have a lot of players to talk about. So let's jump in and look at the top wide receivers on the board, and three of the top players on the board are top 10 consensus players. And I would even say that the top four players on the board are consensus top 15 players. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about Travis Hunter from Colorado. Colorado is playing Arizona this weekend. So the cool thing is that if you look, there's Colorado and there's Arizona, and Travis Hunter plays corner and he plays wide receiver. So when Travis Hunter is on defense, he is going to be matched up against the number 2 wide receiver in the country. So the Colorado-Arizona game is going to be a must watch. If your team needs a corner or your team needs a wide receiver, this is going to be a really good game. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the corner section on the second half of the show. Missouri this weekend plays Auburn. So if the Travis Hunter, Tacario, McMillan show is not what you're looking for, we can watch Missouri play Auburn, and you can watch Luther Burden, probably a top 10 pick in this year's draft. So definitely some good matchups there. Isaiah Bond from Texas is playing Georgia. So the Texas-Georgia game is probably the best game of the weekend. I believe that's the number 1 and number 5 team in the country, something like that, right? So Texas-Georgia is going to be a good game. And in that game, let's take a look at Isaiah Bond from Texas as a wide receiver. And I think the question you want to ask yourself when you watch Isaiah Bond play, would you take him at wide receiver ahead of any of the 3 guys ahead of him? I have seen boards where Bond is higher than Burden. Okay. That's all of one board, but it's a person I highly respect. So ask yourself, just from a critical thinking standpoint, Texas against Georgia, is Isaiah Bond one of the top 3 receivers in the class? Okay. Ohio State is off this week, so Emeka Egbuka, 5th receiver on the board, is not playing. Colorado State this weekend is playing Air Force. So Torrey Horton, wide receiver from Colorado State, is playing against Air Force. Ole Miss is off this week, so we don't get to see Trey Harris play. Oregon is playing Purdue this weekend, so wide receiver Tez Johnson from Oregon will be playing against Purdue. So good matchup there. And again, one of the questions you want to ask yourself is Tez Johnson moving ahead of the players above him? Is he doing enough in the last half of the season to move past the players above him? So the same question I asked about Bond, is Bond playing good enough to move ahead of the 3 players above him? I would definitely start asking yourself that about these players here in the middle, because we have another player, Jalen Royals from Utah State. Utah State is playing TCU this weekend. So again, ask yourself, is Jalen Royals doing enough to move himself higher? Okay. Alik Eilmanor from Stanford is playing SMU. So Eilmanor is having a really good season. I always hope that players declare, but he could be one of the players here that goes back to school on the list. But anyway, so Stanford is playing SMU. Okay, the next player I want to talk about is Ty Felton from Maryland. Okay, so Ty Felton is playing for Maryland, and Maryland is playing against USC. And I would ask the same question I said about some of the receivers above him. Felton has already shot up the draft board. Okay. How much higher can he go? So a question I would ask, and I would compare Felton to Tez Johnson. So Tez Johnson will not be everybody's cup of tea at wide receiver. If you need more of a boundary wide receiver, you're going to be looking at Isle Manor or Felton over Johnson. So Johnson might have more big play ability. He's a small, shiftier slot type wide receiver with a lot of straight line speed. Whereas Isle Manor and Felton can play more out wide at the NFL level. Ask yourself again, Felton, Isle Manor, would you put them ahead of Johnson? Right? And could they come up and could they get themselves ahead of Harris? Okay. Miami is playing Louisville this weekend. So Xavier Restrepo from Miami is playing Louisville. And right now, I want to pause here because Restrepo and higher, all of those players I have as day 1 or day 2 picks. Okay. Evan Stewart from Oregon, I have just outside the top 100, right? So we talked about Oregon playing Purdue. Evan Stewart will also be a wide receiver on that field playing Purdue. So you see 2 Oregon receivers pretty much in the top 100. Okay. So Ole Miss is off this week, and you see a second Ole Miss receiver here, Antwain Wells. So we see Trey Harris from Ole Miss, Antwain Wells from Ole Miss. They're off this week. But I do want to scroll down and get to a couple of guys who I'm probably going to be moving up the board real shortly. And that's going to be the 2 Illinois wide receivers. So Illinois is playing Michigan this weekend. So let's pay attention to Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin, the wide receivers from Illinois against Michigan. And let's transition that right now to cornerback. So Will Johnson, corner from Michigan. And then if we scroll just a little bit, actually, no, wrong. I was thinking wrong school that had 2 corners at the top. So Will Johnson, corner from Michigan, is going up against Illinois. And Illinois has 2 wide receivers, including Pat Bryant. And I think Pat Bryant is going to be in my top 100 the next time I release a top 100. So let's pay attention to that matchup, both from the standpoint of Will Johnson is one of the top 10 players in the country, and the Illinois wide receivers. Illinois put, I believe it was Isaiah Johnson. He was a wide receiver last year, really great week at the Senior Bowl. And he's either on the Lions roster or on the Lions practice squad right now. So Illinois has put wide receivers into the NFL. They've got 2 more coming. Let's pay attention to that Illinois-Michigan matchup with wide receiver matched against cornerback. Okay, so Notre Dame plays Georgia Tech. Benjamin Morrison is injured and out for the season. I still think that Morrison is likely going to be a first-round pick, even with the injury. Obviously, we need medicals to check out, but you can see on the board right now, Morrison is the 2nd highest-ranked corner on the board. Travis Hunter would probably be ranked higher than Morrison, may or may not be ranked higher than Will Johnson. Siobhan Revelle from Eastern Carolina. Eastern Carolina is playing Army. Siobhan Revelle is injured and out for the season. Ohio State is off this week, so we do not get to see Denzel Burke play, 4th corner on the board. Okay. Arizona is playing Colorado. So when Travis Hunter is on offense, let's see him matched against Tacario Davis. Tacario Davis is probably a first-round corner. So all 5 of the corners that you see listed here, the top 5, are likely first-round picks pending injury checks to Morrison and Revelle. So Tacario Davis playing against Travis Hunter. Let's take a look at that matchup. We would want to see Davis show out. And if Davis plays well, I can see Davis becoming corner 2 in this class. right? We've already pointed out Morrison and Ravel are injured. Would a team picking in the top 15 that did not make the playoffs take the chance on injured players, or do they want the player that played the entire college football season? So if you answer that question, Tacario Davis has now become a top 15 to top 20 draft pick. It's not the strongest draft class at the top, so there's definitely room for players like Davis to play themselves into the top 15. So let's take a look at that. Jahdae Barron from Texas is playing Georgia. So again, the Texas-Georgia game is probably the best game of the weekend from a team standpoint. I definitely like the Colorado-Arizona game from a wide receiver corner matchup better. But Jahdae Barron, corner from Texas. And what you need to realize about Barron is that last season, people were projecting him as slot corner or safety, and this year he's playing boundary corner at Texas. So what you're looking at here is a really good football player. He's definitely in the top 50. What you have to ask yourself when you're watching Texas and Georgia play is, do you see Barron as more of a safety? Do you see him as a slot corner? Do you see him as a boundary corner? So that's something to check out in that Texas-Georgia game. Okay, the next game to talk about is Kentucky playing Florida. Okay, so the corner from Kentucky, Maxwell Hairston, is definitely in the top 100. We are in the top 100 all the way through Hancock. Okay, so Hairston's a top 100 corner. So if you're watching Kentucky play Florida, check out Maxwell Hairston, corner from Kentucky. Washington is off this week. We don't get to see Jabbar Muhammad. Virginia Tech is off this week. We don't get to see Mansour Delane. Ohio State is off this week. We don't get to see Jordan Hancock. Quincy Riley from Louisville. So I mentioned at the very end, I believe he was the 10th receiver I mentioned was Xavier Restrepo. The wide receiver from Miami is going to be going up against Quincy Riley, the corner from Louisville. So this is a really good game for both players because who's ever going to get the best of that matchup, wide receiver against corner, is likely going to improve their draft stock more. Both are top 100 players. The question is, can they crack the top 60? Would somebody take Quincy Riley, corner, in the second round? Would somebody take Xavier Restrepo, wide receiver, in the second round? I think this matchup this weekend can help determine a lot of that. Okay, the last corner that we want to talk about is Kobe Bryant, corner from Kansas. So I have Bryant just outside the top 100 right now. Okay, and Kansas is going against Houston. So if you're watching the Kansas-Houston game, check out Kobe Bryant, cornerback from Kansas. You can see that there's a few. So, for example, in the Georgia-Texas game, Dalen Everett, the corner from Georgia, is sitting just outside the top 100. So that would be a player that's going to be matched up against Isaiah Bond from Texas. So I would definitely point that out, just as a courtesy to Everett, and the fact that even though he's not in the top 10, definitely a draftable corner and possible top 100 player with a good showing this weekend. So my name is Jim, and this podcast is sponsored by NFLDraftFanatics.com. So NFL Draft Fanatics is the only interactive mock draft simulator. And what that means is that the fans control the big board. The fans control who gets mock drafted to their team when users of the simulator are drafting for other teams. So the player boards at NFL Draft Fanatics change. They change based upon users doing mock drafts. So if you decide that any of the players we talked about, for example, Dalen Everett is a top 100 player, if you pick him in the second round, he's going to move up the board. Okay? And the players you don't pick move down the board. So it's a very dynamic mock draft experience. And if you have any questions about any of the players or the simulator, we welcome the comments on YouTube or on our Twitter. Our Twitter is at NFL Draft Fanatic. There is no I in fanatic. We also want to give a shout out to NFL Draft Fanatics and the YouTube channel, because this weekend on Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, there is a special episode where we are going to be going through 220 players in the NFL draft. So myself and several other people will be joining me, and it's a lot of fun. This is the third time that we've done it. So if you have a chance Friday and you want to get some new names and you want to go further down this list of corners and find out more about any of the players on this list, we will be talking about those players Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern. It is the same podcast. Misses are relevant, just much different format than this one. So if you have a chance Friday, check us out. It's a laid back group, and it's a very eccentric group because we come from all different walks of life. But what we all have in common is we love talking football. We love talking the NFL draft. So hopefully we see you then. Until then, my name is Jim. On behalf of NFL Draft Fanatics, thank you very much for watching. And remember, every day is draft day if you have the right attitude. Thank you very much and have a great day.